everybody. My name is Dr. Shripad Joshi. I'm a volunteer with Canadian Science Policy Center. And today's panel, we'll be discussing nature-based solutions in Canada, policies, frameworks, multi-sector cooperation to reach Canada's 2030 climate and biodiversity goals, which is co-hosted by Future Earth. I will now hand over to Professor Damon Matthews, who is the Professor of Geography, Planning and Environment at Concordia University in Montreal. Over to you, Damon.
Everybody, and welcome to our webinar. I'm very pleased to be moderating this webinar. We have a panel of 5 distinguished guests who will be offering their thoughts. So our panel, as advertised, is called Nature-Based Solutions in Canada, Policy Frameworks and Multi-Sector Cooperation to Reach Canada's 2030 Climate and Biodiversity Goals. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Future Earth Canada, Sustainability in the Digital Age and Concordia University, where I am speaking from, are located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we work. Tiohtià:ke, or Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. So for our discussion today, we are going to be talking about and exploring the idea of nature-based solutions. So these are actions to protect, manage, and restore ecosystems for the benefit of people and nature. For example, might include restoring wetlands to prevent flooding, or planting urban green spaces for cooler cities, or protecting coastal ecosystems to buffer against storms. But there are still many gaps hindering wide implementation of nature-based solutions across Canada. These include public understanding of what nature-based solutions are. There are quite a few other names for very similar concepts. There are also research and data limitations, challenges in accessing and using existing knowledge. And so we'll be discussing some of these examples of how to address these gaps with our panelists today. And I'll just say quickly before I introduce the panelists, so I'm a professor at Concordia University in Montreal. I work on climate science and various related concepts, including the science of nature-based solutions and how we understand using natural systems to address climate and other environmental issues. I'm also currently the director of the Future Earth Canada Hub, and so Future Earth is the co-sponsor for this webinar today. Future Earth is an international organization that works on mobilizing and organizing sustainability science around the world. And so we're very happy to have an office of Future Earth based in Montreal and to be bringing this panel discussion to you today. So quickly, I think we're going to have a poll in a few minutes, but I'll just introduce the panelists first. So we have Émilie Lebuse, who is a senior advisor for engagement and sustainable finance and biodiversity at Finance Montréal. We have Stephanie Poirier, a senior policy analyst, climate change and sustainability standards council of Canada. Zara Jadangian, a research officer for nature-based solutions lead at the National Research Council of Canada. Kirsten Ziegfeld, a distinguished Simon Fraser University professor of climate science, based at Simon Fraser University. And Michael Twigg, the director for nature economies at the Smart Prosperity Institute. Please note that a change from the original panel lineup, unfortunately, Jason Taylor, the co-founder and CEO of Climate Finance Advisors, was not able to join the panel today. So we have a slightly reduced, but still very diverse and strong panel for you today. So we're going to start with a quick poll. If you were listening carefully to my introduction, this should be a very easy poll, but if not, you can have a go. So please choose one of these options for how you understand nature-based solutions. And I would also say, if you don't like any of these answers, feel free to compose your own understanding of nature-based solutions and post it into the chat. Maybe I'll just leave this for a few minutes. People can make their selection and we'll continue with the panel. Okay, so I think most people have had a chance to look at this and hopefully select something. Maybe one of the organizers could close the panel and put the results up. Let me close the poll. Excellent. So I see that most people were in fact listening to my introduction, which is fantastic. So I'm glad that we have a more or less common understanding, at least from these four options, of what nature-based solutions are. Of course, the other three options, some of you selected that option B. So nature-based solutions, yes, can be a type of action to protect the environment. And so it's not an incorrect answer. And of course, options C and D are particular applications or understanding of nature-based solutions, which are used in some contexts. But we're going to move forward with the first definition for now. So working with nature to manage, protect, and restore natural areas like forests and wetlands, to store carbon, protect us from climate change, and help reverse wildlife decline, in addition to all sorts of other potential applications like water stability or air quality or social and cultural, promoting social and cultural values. Okay, so let's move on to the first question. So as mentioned in the introduction, nature-based solutions can help to meet Canada's 30 by 30 target. So this is Canada's stated goal to conserve 30% of its land area by 2030. We are a little bit less than halfway to that target right now. So there's a lot of scope over the next 5 years to implement nature-based solutions with an eye to actually achieving this target by 2030. And so this commitment was made under the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which came out of the Montreal Biodiversity COP, the Conference of Parties, which was held a few years ago. Nature-based solutions may also address a substantial portion, potentially up to a third of Canada's 2030 carbon reduction commitment, although there are many scientific questions around that particular number. But of course, this and other climate mitigation actions will be a focus of the upcoming United Nations Climate Change Conference taking place in Brazil in November. So first question for the panel, from your sector's perspective, how are nature-based solutions contributing to achieve 2030 biodiversity and climate targets in Canada? And maybe I'll start this question addressed to Kirsten Zickfeld.
Yeah, thanks, Damon, and thank you for inviting me to speak on this panel. So I will specifically address the contribution of nature-based solutions to Canada's climate target, which is my area of expertise. And when we talk about nature-based solution in the context of climate, what we mostly refer to as the carbon sequestration potential of these solutions. So the idea is that by restoring, protecting, or conserving ecosystems, either we keep carbon stocks in place, so we avoid these emissions of carbon reaching the atmosphere, which exacerbate climate change, or there are actions that enhance the sequestration potential of these ecosystems. So we would make sure that we manage these ecosystems in a way that they sequester more carbon from the atmosphere. And I'm going to base my remarks largely on a report by the Canadian or by the Council of the Canadian Academies, which came out in 2022 and assessed the potential of nature-based climate solutions in Canada generally, but also with regard to the 2030 mitigation target. And generally, the carbon sequestration potential of nature-based climate solutions in Canada is highly uncertain. And the reason is that we have these different ecosystems, and even within ecosystems, let's say forests or peatlands, there are large variations within the country. So it's and given the limited evidence, it is very challenging to scale up findings from one place to the other. However, within these uncertainties, the council found that forest protection and management, avoided conversion of grasslands and peatlands, and nature-based solutions that have to do with agricultural practices have the highest mitigation potential. However, something that we need to be aware of is that these nature-based solutions are affected by ecosystem responses to changing climate. So we're reminded of this again this summer with our second worst wildfire season. So as climate warms and the intensity and frequency of droughts and extreme heat increases, these ecosystems that we leverage for nature-based climate solutions are also affected, and in a way that reduces their sequestration potential or leads to emission of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Something else we also need to take into account that nature-based climate solutions can produce additional effects, so in addition to carbon sequestration. And the reason is that, let's say, if we convert agricultural areas to forests, for example, we change the way that energy is exchanged at the surface. And for example, we make surfaces darker, which means we reduce the albedo or the reflectivity of the surface, which leads to warming. And this is particularly true in Canada, where we have seasonal snow cover in many regions. Okay, so this is something that we need to take into account, that while, let's say, we sequester carbon, we also affect the land surface in different ways, which might actually counter the benefits from carbon sequestration. And we find that these, in our research, that these what we call biogeophysical effects, which have to do with energy balance at the surface, actually are quite substantial. So they can offset up to a third or even half of the climate benefit from carbon sequestration. And so what the panel found is that if nature-based climate solutions are implemented successfully in Canada, they can play a supporting role in meeting Canada's climate targets, but are no silver bullet. So in fact, what the panel assessment found is that they have a potential to reduce about 6% of Canada's current emissions, which is lower than the 30% Damon mentioned, which is often based on these global assessments, which don't often take the realities on the ground into account. So yes, nature-based climate solutions deployed in Canada can support climate mitigation targets, but they will need to be supplemented by stringent emission reductions in all sectors. So there's no way that we can leverage nature-based climate solutions to offset emissions from other sectors at the large scale. So I'll leave it here for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen, and yes, thank you for correcting my number. Appreciate that. So I think we'll move to Zara
Sure.
next. So I know you work on sort of a more urban scale application of nature-based solutions. So why don't you give us a sense of your perspective on this?
Sure. So first of all, good day, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm super excited to be here. So I just want to mention that at National Research Council Canada, we believe nature-based solutions are truly becoming cornerstone of how we move toward the 2030 biodiversity and climate targets. And honestly, what excites me most is that nature-based solutions allow us to tackle multiple challenges at once: climate adaptation, biodiversity loss, community well-being, energy savings, greenhouse gas reduction, air quality improvement, all while keeping nature at the center. At NRC, we are leading several projects that directly support Canadian cities in tackling two of the most pressing climate risk events: urban heat islands and urban flooding. For example, we are studying how trees, green roofs and blue roofs, and reflective surfaces using the materials on building envelopes and streets that can reflect solar radiation back to the atmosphere instead of absorbing heat. The integration of these, let's say, nature-based solutions can work together to reduce extreme heat in dense neighborhoods and in vulnerable buildings, such as long-term care home facilities, social housing, and primary schools. And so through large-scale modeling and building simulations and real data collection, we are quantifying how these interventions lower temperature, reduce cooling demands, and improve comfort for residents. We are also exploring how green infrastructure like constructed wetland can capture stormwater, reduce flood risks, and improve water quality while also creating habitats that support biodiversity. And we're also looking at green roof and blue roof design, construction, and maintenance, not just because we wanted to bring nature back to the cities, but because we believe that we should take advantage of these vast unused surfaces of the low slope commercial roofs and retain and detain water during the storm events for a longer time period and then release it gradually to the sewerage system to prevent flooding in our dense urban areas. And importantly, we are aiming to develop demonstration sites with municipalities and industry where nature-based solutions are tested in real-world setting, helping bridge science, policy, and practice. And if you're interested, I encourage you to please contact with us and be part of our nature-based solution living lab initiative, which is designed to showcase the long-term impact of these solutions on building and communities. And what is powerful in these projects is that we don't just, let's say, tick a climate box or biodiversity box. These projects create healthier, more livable communities. And by 2030, nature-based solution can help Canada reduce emissions from cooling, protect people from heat stress and flooding, and expand urban ecosystems that support pollinators and wildlife. So in short, nature-based solutions aren't just a nice to have, they are a must-have strategy for meeting our biodiversity and climate commitments. And at NRC, we are working hand in hand with Housing, Infrastructure and Communities Canada and other OGDs and other partners to make sure these solutions are scalable, evidence-based, and accessible to communities across the country. Thank you, Damon.
Thank you, Zara, for those opening remarks. So maybe I'll ask this question quickly to Emily before we move on to the next question. Emily, you just turned off your camera. Was that on purpose?
Sorry about that. Hi, everyone. Also really excited to be here with passionate peers to dive into this question. I myself work at the intersection of sustainable finance and biodiversity, mobilizing the financial sector around biodiversity and nature-based solution. So my sector perspective is the financial sector perspective. And I'd start by saying that nature is still an emerging theme in financial sector, but interest is increasing among sustainable finance stakeholders. And there's a growing interest with two principal focuses. The first one is on risks. So there's a need from an investor perspective to better understanding dependencies and vulnerabilities, but with a focus on protecting capital. And the other one is on opportunities. So I also can mention a growing interest in integrating nature-based solution into ROI models while generating positive impacts. And I had the chance to work on a project over the past 6 months. I'll talk about it more later, but for now, I can say that this overview reflects similar findings in Quebec. So let's put it this way: the status of financial sector mobilization on this question. Well, the majority of the surveyed organizations are really still at the preliminary stage of integrating biodiversity-related issue. And so, I mean, risk, impact, dependency analysis regarding nature, I'm going to say that it's often the initial entry point. And when it comes to opportunity and particularly nature-based solution, well, it remains emergent, and few financial actors yet have developed a targeted investment product or strategy in this area. But the work we've done really helped to identify buyers, levers also. So what we can see regarding this is that the sector right now remain largely driven with a short-term vision, whereas nature-based solution require a long-term approach. So there's something to think about here. Also, there's a significant knowledge gap, both regarding nature-related financial project, but just related to nature-based solution. Maybe the last thing I want to mention is also the difficulty in demonstrating the financial materiality of biodiversity, and maybe the perceived lack of client interest. This may complicate the integration into risk management and strategic decision-making process. This is the portrait for, I think, the financial sector.
Okay, thank you, Emily. So the next question is moving a little bit into the finance more deeply. So I will come back to some of those points that you just raised. I do want to just quickly acknowledge that there's a couple of important comments in the chat about our definition of nature-based solutions not fully recognizing or not recognizing the role of Indigenous peoples. And I think that is a really important angle. We obviously were not able to achieve Indigenous representation on this panel. I think it is at the front of many people's minds as we think about these questions, how we can work with Indigenous leadership to move forward on nature-based actions and initiatives. So the next question, it's related to sustainable finance and/or potentially Indigenous-led example. And I'll turn this to Michael first to speak to. So what are some examples in practice of nature-based solutions that are sustainably financed and/or Indigenous-led that translate to equitable and scalable biodiversity and climate outcomes on the ground?
Thanks, Damon, and just want to echo the thanks that everyone has given for participants joining us today and for my fellow panelists as well. Putting ideas together is a really important area to be discussing these days. I waffle back and forth on which side of this to answer, because what we do at Smart Prosperity Institute, which a few of the panelists have already mentioned, is really look to connect the idea of how nature-based solutions really form that triple bottom line of benefits. So when we're thinking about climate resilience, when we're thinking about positive biodiversity outcomes, but also the community well-being component. That's a big element of work that we do at SPI. So I'm gonna focus on the Indigenous-led component and really hone in on Indigenous protected and conserved areas, but also co-manage Indigenous sites and conservation areas, and really point to, I think, some of the comments that we've received in the chat already, that front and center is not just the duty to consult on a lot of these issues, but it's really the co-convening, co-management, partnership development that leads to better conservation outcomes and land stewardship practices across the board. One of the great examples that I can point to that has been widely successful and widely touted as a success case in the Canadian context is the co-management of Tyendinaga National Park in the Northwest Territories. What we've seen there is ecotourism, guardians programs, cultural revitalization that comes with funding that's attached. It's not just private funding, it's not just public funding, it's just not local funding. The idea here is that it's a holistic approach to sustainably financing a locally derived and Indigenous-led solution for a problem that we're all facing in terms of how to implement more nature-based solutions. What I think is really interesting in these areas is when we think about the work that we undertake at the Smart Prosperity Institute, and when we think about what sustainable finance looks like, we really point to public-private partnerships that involve local consultation. And what we do at SPI, a couple of the projects that we're currently working on involve additional nations that are looking to develop similar types of approaches and processes, and they take time. And what we really want to kind of hone in on in terms of what's successful from this perspective is governance and equity from an Indigenous perspective, Indigenous rights, Indigenous jurisdiction is front and center. We got to go beyond the idea of the duty to consult. It really has to be co-management, co-partnership, and that is what we need to look towards in terms of leveraging sustainable finance tools for things like carbon markets, green bonds, public investment opportunities, but also what local priorities and objectives are in terms of designing programs and policies that are out there. When we think about scalability and success, those are the things that are really going to put us in a good place moving forward.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. That's great. Maybe I'll pass it back to you, Emily. Do these thoughts resonate with you, or do you have other examples how to move forward on this question?
Yeah, I mean, it really echoes our the way we think of this as well, and it's just that on my hand, there are some great initiatives that I've been following. There's, for example, the Carolinian Canada. It's a coalition protecting critical habitats in southern Ontario. And to your point, Michael, it's like there's this. I do think that there's this holistic approach because it's financed through public, private, and philanthropic partnership with long-term ecological monitoring. We also work, Finance Montréal, we are now new partners with Nature Investment Hub. And it's a national platform addressing the 20 billion nature financing gap. And it's really interesting because it's built around 3 strategic pillars, which is capacity building, thought leadership, again, and demonstration project. And maybe another one I want to mention is Raven Indigenous Outcome Fund. It's an Indigenous led fund manager using outcome-based financing to support relevant and measurable solutions. Other initiative I'm also following, for instance, everything related to pilot project in regenerative agriculture, which are combining carbon credits with biodiversity gains. This is something interesting. And I'm also thinking of a few, emerging financial tools, impact bonds for nature, result-based financing. This could also be levers to mobilize capital in Canada.
Yeah, great. Thanks. That's a really important, really good set of examples. Just before we move to the next question, does anyone else on the panel want to jump in with anything else in this question of how to scale nature-based solutions or some particularly leading examples that they have encountered? Sorry, I saw you unmuted, but maybe that was it. No, that's fine. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question. I think we will circle back to some of these finance scalability questions towards the end. So I'll direct this question to you, Stephanie. So standards and frameworks are really important to define what is a successful nature-based solution. And though are currently limited and probably inadequate to actually monitor the success of nature-based solution implementations and impacts in the long term. So from where you sit, what are the elements that are necessary to design standards or monitoring frameworks to ensure that nature-based solutions align with both environment and social well-being? And for example, what are the metrics that we need to track, and how do we actually define success in the successful implementation of the nature-based solution?
That's a great question. First, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here. So I work for the Standards to Support Resilience and Infrastructure program at the Standards Council of Canada. We don't develop standards ourselves, but we lead the development of them. So we do all the groundwork, engaging with various, experts, interested parties to identify gaps, and then validating those needs and, scoping out what the standard should be and then, funding them. We work across a bunch of different areas, mostly focused on climate adaptation, and nature-based solutions is one of our streams. And we work very closely with NRC to build off of their research and codify it into guidance and standards. And one thing that I want to sort of specify when I'm talking about standards, the types of standards that I'm talking about are national standards of Canada. So as opposed to like private standards, like industry standards or professional standards that are developed in a very insular way, like for that profession, by that profession. A national standard of Canada follows like a super rigid process. It's an accredited process, so it can only be developed by an accredited standard development organization. And I would say one of the most important principles or, aspects of this rigid process is that the standard has to be developed by a balanced matrix of expertise and geographical representation. So you have, a bunch of different interests coming together and deciding, they have to come to a consensus on what goes into that standard. And because of that buy-in, it's considered de-risked. There's also public review that gives, all of you or anyone a chance to provide feedback on what goes into the standard. It's reviewed every 5 years to make sure it's kept up to date. And because of all that, because it's de-risked and whatever, they're quite powerful tools. And they could be used as part of requirements, like as part of codes, regulations, bylaws, as procurement requirements. They can be used by practitioners to, help inform design, implementation, etc. So standards can help build trust and improve consistency while reducing risk. And I should just mention, like, we have a whole bunch of nature-based solution projects in the works that I won't have time to talk about. But, for example, there's a standard on green roofs. There's a guide on nature-based solutions in agriculture that's being developed. And I can't really speak to technical specifics, but ultimately the way that you define success depends on your goals, right? So standards can outline ways to measure performance and ensure that this is done consistently across the board. So for example, there's many guidelines on green roofs, but they're not harmonized in any way. So having a standard will hopefully help with that. And when SCC funds the standard, we set the scope based on expert advice, but ultimately it's up to the technical committee developing it to decide what goes in it. And then of course, the public review will provide feedback. So just to provide like a couple examples, one project, there's a standard being developed on watershed-based management of flooding and erosion using natural and nature-based solutions. And so in the scope, we've set that there should be a section on monitoring and adaptive management, in the list of topics that it should cover. And then we have another project on the design of coastal nature-based solutions. And that should also include best practices for not only design and construction, but also maintenance and monitoring. But in other cases, it might be more appropriate to have like a standalone, like a standard solely focused on monitoring and evaluation. It all kind of depends on, what type of standard it is and what it covers.
Thanks, Stephanie. I just wanted to, there's a question in the Q&A that maybe there's a very short question, but someone's wondering how the Standards Council of Canada is different from CSA.
Oh, do you want me to tackle that now?
I mean, maybe just very quickly if you can, and then
Sure. SCC, we oversee the standardization system in Canada. So we set the rules and the guidance and all of that stuff. CSA Group, they are an accredited standard development organization. So we accredit them to develop standards. That's the main difference. We're a federal crown corporation. So we're part of the federal family, as they call it. And they develop standards and they have their own certification programs and stuff like that. That's the main difference.
Okay, thank you. And just a note to the attendees, I know there's a few people have thrown comments into the chat, which is fine, although I am going to have trouble reading all the chats as well as listening to what people are saying. So I would encourage you to put your questions into the Q&A. I think that might be a simpler way. And then if you would like to upvote a question, so we come to that period, I'll be able to see the ones that are the most popular. So staying on this question of standards for another few minutes, and we'll move to Zara.
Sure. First of all, thank you for this question because it's a very important question. And you're absolutely right. One of the big challenges with nature-based solution is not implementation, implementing them, but also being able to monitor, evaluate, and prove their long-term value. And if we want NBS to scale and be trusted as part of Canada's climate and biodiversity strategy, then strong standards and monitoring frameworks are essential. From my perspective, there are 4 key elements we need to get right. First is a clear environmental performance metrics. We need to quantify ecological and climate benefits with consistent indicators and KPIs. Some of the most important ones include temperature reduction, both surface and air, carbon sequestration, GHG reduction, stormwater capture, flood prevention, biodiversity gains like species richness, and improvement in air and water quality. The second is social and community well-being indicators. Nature-based solutions are not just about environment, they are about people. So we should be tracking these such as thermal comfort and health outcome, equitable access in vulnerable communities, well-being and recreational benefits, and even local job creation that's tied to NBS design, construction, and maintenance. The third element, I believe, is the resiliency and life cycle of the nature-based solutions. I mean, the NBS shouldn't just look good on day one, it needs to deliver for decades. And that means monitoring maintenance, life cycle performance, integrating with gray infrastructure and adaptability to changing climate conditions. We have to be able to manage and monitor them. And finally, standardization and comparability, meaning that we do need frameworks that allow results to be compared across cities and projects. That means that we need standards data collection, open data platforms, and guidance on how to assess trade-offs. For instance, when we maximize cooling without compromising water use, or boosting biodiversity while keeping public safety in mind. So all in all, how we do define success, for me, success is when a nature-based solution delivers measurable benefits across the triple bottom line: environmental gains, social well-being, and economic feasibility. If a project can reduce local heat by a few degrees, cut flood risk, create habitat, improve quality of life, and be maintained affordably by municipalities, building practitioners, builders, then we can confidently say, yes, we've been successful and it's working. So in short, designing standards and monitoring frameworks means combining hard environmental data with social impact metrics, life cycle assessment, and governance tool. And at NRC, at National Research Council Canada, I am leading the nature-based solution projects, and we are already moving in this direction. We are developing technical guidelines, we are piloting nature-based solutions in living lab, and we are working with municipalities to define the right indicator. Because in the end, what gets measured, get managed. And only with a strong framework can nature-based solution truly deliver Canada's 2030 biodiversity and climate commitments. Thank you, Damon.
Yeah, thank you, Lara. That was a really nice breakdown of the different needs and just what we want to measure. So you mentioned this idea of the triple bottom line, which Michael also mentioned in his opening remarks. So maybe I'll use that as a way of bouncing the question over to Michael for some additional thoughts on this way of thinking about the value of nature-based solutions.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, as a green economy think tank, we try as hard as possible not to break everything down into dollars and cents when we're talking about nature and nature-based solutions. But in this case, it really is about that. And I think that's when we're talking about the standardization of what we measure, how we measure it, and then how we translate that into dollar values to be able to start accounting for that at different levels, whether it's private or public sector. I think that's a really important element that we need to tackle right off the bat. And there are standards and frameworks around accounting measures that integrate ecosystem service valuations, nature, biodiversity elements, natural asset accounting, but there's quite a few of them. And I think that's the same thing we were hearing from Stephanie, that there are frameworks and standards that are out there, and the idea is how do we streamline those together in order to create a Canadian national standard so that we all get on the same page, whether We're a municipality in Quebec where I'm currently located, or if we're on, the west coast of British Columbia, the way things are being measured would be the same. The way they're being accounted would be the same. And that's when we're really talking about what scale could look like, when we're able to not just do one-off projects that have to design it from the ground all the way through to completion. The one that comes up quite a bit for us, which is quite arduous in terms of implementation, is the UN System for Economic Environmental Accounting Ecosystem Account framework, which is quite rigorous. It's considered the gold standard internationally and has been piloted in a number of occasions across Canada. But what ends up being one of the biggest sticking points is the data that's collected up front that Zara was mentioning. It's not standardized yet. So it's being designed and redesigned again, and it comes at a cost. And it's those costs right there when we're thinking about what standardization can truly bring to nature-based solutions. It's just not about unlocking the scaling component. It's about reducing the costs up front to make it less risky over time. And the last thing I really want to say about that risk and standardization component looking forward, another key element is, nature-based solutions often look relatively attractive when being considered with non-nature-based or gray infrastructure. But what really challenges some of the long-term planning and strategic planning is that future forecasting. So when we're thinking about depreciation in value, when we're thinking about risk reduction, when we're thinking about return on investment, this is where typical standard non-nature-based infrastructure has the advantage to date, because there is no standard about how these different types of nature-based solutions are treated within these different framings and frameworks. And it ends up being a per project design, and it doesn't always come through that this is of benefit moving forward. You have to create those standards at the project level, and that doesn't create the same level of confidence that you would have if those guidance documents and standards were available at the national level. So standards can really drive this conversation forward when we're thinking about trying to unlock the competitive edge for nature-based solutions when going that comparative route.
Thanks. So someone put into the chat, which actually would be helpful to me also. You said a big long name and something followed by, this is really the gold standard. What was the something again? Could you just repeat that for everybody?
It's the United Nations System for Environmental Economic Accounting Ecosystem Account Framework. The short acronym is UNSEEAEA. I'll be happy to type it into the chat, and I can provide a link to it.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, so maybe we'll move on to the next question. I think we're doing well for time here. So this will be the last, scripted question, if you will. And so I would welcome anyone's thoughts on additional points that haven't been brought up yet. But just for this last question, so while there is still work to be done to improve our understanding of nature-based solutions, how might we incentivize multiple sectors, academia, government, financial, civil, Indigenous communities, and other communities to engage in actions that support more widespread adoption of nature-based solutions in Canada or beyond? And maybe just I'll go back to Kirsten, who hasn't spoken in a little while, and maybe you want to have a first go at this question, and then we'll move through the panel.
Yeah, happy to. So the important role of universities in this space is that of research. So as we learned, there are still many open questions with regard to all aspects of nature-based solutions. However, I believe that universities also have a greater role to play, and I would say this is exemplified very nicely by my university. So I work at Simon Fraser University, and we have an initiative which is called Community-Based Climate Innovation. And here the idea is to transcend academic research and really make sure that findings that are or academic findings become available to the community. And so this is a strategy at the institutional level. And some of the important pillars are interdisciplinary collaboration. So making sure that people from finance, climate science, biodiversity and social sciences work together. Another very important element is that of co-creation with community partners. So this initiatives is engaged with the municipalities within the Metro Vancouver area, and and multiple community partners to work on transportation, on buildings, on coastal protection. And another element is that of knowledge mobilization to making sure that these results become available to the wider community. Thanks.
Stephanie, do you want to jump in next on this question?
Sure. So, as part of my job, I talk to a lot of people, right? So, like municipalities, practitioners, like all kinds of people. And I'm sure you've heard this too, but what I've been hearing, especially from municipalities, is that nature-based solutions seem risky. So there could be kind of a disincentive to consider them because, they might feel like, oh, we don't have any practice with this, or like it seems like new and emerging, even though like some of these things have been done by Indigenous peoples for many, many, many years. But for them, it seems risky, and case studies can help, because it can show municipalities, for example, that like other people are doing it and there's like lessons learned. But I really believe that National Standards of Canada can play a role here because they can give confidence. They can codify research. They're considered de-risked because of that, rigid process I was talking about earlier. And there's input from different interests, and it can give such confidence to governments that they can tie these standards to requirements. So, for example, like if a municipality is considering restoring or enhancing a wetland, that's something that we're hoping to have a standard developed on in the next couple of years. They could tie that to, procurement. They could tie it to like, okay, the design, and it could help inform a lot of decisions. And then, academia, for example, they can use standards in their teaching. It can also inform their research. Standards can really establish definitions and best practices for the design and implementation of nature-based solutions. They can set material requirements, or like roles and responsibilities. It really helps to like establish like a baseline. But on top of that, another incentive that it can help with is it can save a lot of time and money because you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Like it's already laid out for you, the process that you have to follow. And there's also flexibility in applying it. Michael was talking about scale. The National Standards of Canada, like they are supposed to be pan-Canadian, but usually, you can apply them to your local context. And ideally you would apply the whole standard, but you can also just be informed by it and checking certain provisions. And because, they're updated usually on a 5-year cycle, they're kept current. So they can be updated with new research. And that's why academic involvement is really important. So there's guides and standards that can help you evaluate your options as well. So for example, one of my projects that I haven't mentioned is a guide on coastal options appraisal. So that'll help users evaluate different options, including nature-based solutions, using different types of analysis. And that can also, help with incentives if it gives them an idea of what's available and what it'll bring them. And ultimately, this is about protecting investments, right? And so having these standards provide that confidence, the fact that they're going to be, implementing something that even with the extra maintenance and monitoring, they can consider all of that in their decision making, and hopefully that would provide an incentive. And I'll just end on the fact that like if you're interested in anything I'm saying, if you want to talk more about standards or if you want to hear more about these projects, if you want to be involved in developing standards, just let me know. I'll drop my email address in the chat. Anyways, thank you.
I just muted myself instead of unmuting myself. Thanks, Stephanie. I'm sure that is true of everyone as well. You have to respond to comments or questions further by email afterwards. But so maybe we'll continue around and go to Emily next. This question.
Sure, happy to jump in. from everything that has been said, I do think that adoption is progressing, but it remains fragmented and limited. One of the things to me that is really important is cross-sectoral initiative. And on that, last winter, under the Ministère de l'Environnement mandate, I co-lead with the CRAP, the Applied Research Center on Ecosystem and Biodiversity, a cross-sectoral initiative on biodiversity issues, and really linked to the financial target of the GPF targets. And during this exercise, we had more than 40 actors that joined, and mostly from the financial sector, because this is the sector we wanted to engage. And so the work we did together through several workshops helped us identify buyers and levers for the sector, and also solution pathways around our priorities that echoes a lot of the things that we've been discussing, like capacity building, methodological and regulatory framework, the need for reliable data and tools, and of course, nature-based solution financing. And I do think that we need to consider them all to address all the barriers. And so to sum this up, based on the recent work, here is what I think we need to shift. I would say that first is a common narrative. We need to position nature-based solution not as an isolated environmental project, but as a strategic levers for economic resilience, climate adaptation, and economical and social well-being. I do think that having a shared vision would help a lot to align priority across sectors, and also maybe unlock broader engagement. The second one is capacity building. We need to invest into targeted trainings, communities of practice, demonstration project. A few of them have been mentioned, but demonstration project that prove that the economic and ecological viability of a nature-based solution and tackle this perceived risk associated. We also need structural intersectoral collaboration, so create formal space for collaboration with shared governance, including indigenous leadership. And the last one that come to mind to me is a clear incentive, implement financial mechanisms such as a biodiversity and carbon credit market, result-based financing, more blended finance. These tools, I think, could be great help.
Thanks, Emily, for the thoughts. Maybe I'll move to Michael next.
Yeah, I agree with, broadly speaking, what my colleagues have been bringing up across the different sectors, but maybe I'll take a focus on the public sector side. I do think there's this vision of policy horizons of what we can implement in terms of what is possible, and I really like Emily's comments around this idea of putting in place. The gist I took away from it was certainty around investment that sets the standard or sets the targets, that has more detail than what we've outlined in the Global Biodiversity Framework, of which Canada has helped co-develop to that fact, and looking towards implementation. What does that mean in terms of the certainty of where incentives are going to be drawn from? Can we count on continued public sector investment in things like nature-based solutions moving forward that helps reduce the risk of getting the private sector involved? I think that idea of incentives drawn from the stage being set with clear public policies that biodiversity, nature-based solutions are not just, as a fellow panelist put it, a nice to have anymore. They really are something that drives that triple bottom line for what a future of Canada's economy is going to look like, that it's going to be resilient, self-sufficient, and able to tackle some of the global challenges that we're talking about when we're thinking about biodiversity declines and cascades, extinction cascades, climate resilience and climate change impacts, but also what is a healthy and happy community in the Canadian context. We're broadly a nation that has a wealth of natural heritage, natural resources, nature-based resources, but those are not infinite. They really are, in that term, based on how we will steward them moving forward. And I think there's a strong incentive to be made at the public policy level that can unlock innovation across the private sector, across academia. It's really setting that stage for action that can help drive those types of partnerships and cross collaboration forward.
Really, really good, important points. Zara, I'll put it to you the last word on this question before moving on to open discussion.
Of course, thank you, Damon, and thank you for every esteemed panelist. You mentioned all the good points, so I'm just going to probably kind of wrapping what I just mentioned. The thing is that scaling up nature-based solutions isn't just about science and policy. It's about creating the right incentives to bring everyone to the table. So if I want to start from the government where I'm working, is that we need clear policy signals. We need to have nature-based solutions in building code, in climate adaptation plans, in infrastructure funding. And if the nature-based solutions are recognized as legitimate, cost-effective infrastructure, then let's say municipalities and provinces will feel more confident investing in them. Second is the financial sector, of course. So we need to connect nature-based solution to risk reduction and long-term value. Insurance companies already see that trees, green roofs, and wetlands reduce flood losses. And they know that these strategies like green roofs and using surface reflective materials on buildings and cooling the urban environment reduces the heat-related illness and deaths and claims. So these are the values that we can kind of show it to people, have some awareness program, have some education, and the tools like green bonds or tax credit or carbon credit, they're all are kind of a driving force that private investment can come and use this, because showing nature-based solutions are good for not only the planet, but also a financially sound strategy that can go for it. In terms of academia and research, what comes to mind is that the incentive is co-developing knowledge with communities, meaning that building monitoring tools, frameworks, and evidence that demonstrate nature-based solution effectiveness. This is something that academia can definitely help us to look into those things and turn the pilots and the monitoring into policy for the government. And the other aspects and the most important things, I believe, as Michael mentioned, as Emily mentioned, is civil sector and communities, meaning that bringing everyone to the table. And if people knows about, we have the awareness, if they know that they're going to be co-benefits, like showing them that shaded trees, cooler schools, a healthier neighborhood is possible, it's achievable. And if they see that by their independency from cooling energies, they have more saving in their accounts. They don't have to pay for the cooling demands during the summertime, and they see nature-based solutions, everyday life improvements, then adaptation accelerates naturally. But all in all, let's not forget that incentives don't always need to be a big or complex things. Sometimes the most powerful change starts small. Imagine if each one of us planted just one tree in our community or cared for one house plant at home. Now multiplied across millions, these small acts build awareness, shift culture, and spark momentum for bigger systematic change. So my invitation is this: whether you are in the government, finance, academia, or simply a citizen like me, let's keep building the frameworks, the funding, the policies, but also remember, change begins with us. One tree, one plant, one action at a time. And together we can grow a truly sustainable future with nature-based solution. And that's why we are proposing the nature-based solution living lab at NRC. And that's why we wanted to have this platform as a showcase, the long-term impact of NBS on buildings and communities. And we aim to bring nature back into gray infrastructure through integrating greenery enhancement. So if you like to know more about it, and if you want to partner with us in this journey, please reach out. We'd love to collaborate. We'd love to hear from you. And yeah, that's the incentive that I can give right now. Plant trees. And well, it will improve your mental health if you keep house plants. So go for it and enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you, Zara. There's a request in the chat for your email, so your comments are obviously appreciated and heard by the audience. So we're going to move into. I've just been thinking of different questions as people are speaking, and maybe I'll start with the kind of slightly awkward question. Maybe we've been talking all about the benefits and all the positive things about nature-based solutions, and I think it's important to acknowledge that nature-based solutions have a bit of a dark side as well, and have been used historically as a way of, greenwashing business as usual, justifying some kind of economic development or extractive activity by, funding some, restoration project on the other side of the country, which also can be, a form of land grabbing and colonialism to kind of, so there's lots of it's also difficult, tricky, and not always positive issues mixed up in the concept of nature-based solutions. And I wonder if anyone has any thoughts or comments on that and how to move from that, away from that, the dark side of MBS towards the more positive benefits of what we're talking about. Yeah, Kristen, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Damon. So I actually also felt compelled to make that point. So I share much of the enthusiasm around nature-based solutions, but also wanted to point out that in the climate space, there are some problematic elements, right? Especially if we use nature-based climate solutions as offsets, which means that we use, let's say, enhanced carbon sequestration by planting trees or restoring forests to offset fossil fuel emissions. And from a climate science perspective, that is highly problematic because there are many reasons, but perhaps I'm giving a few here. So when we burn fossil fuels, right, it's carbon that we dig out of the ground, which is locked for tens or hundreds of thousands of years. And what we do then with offsets is we sequester more carbon in the biosphere, but carbon in the biosphere is actually part of the short-lived carbon cycle, so it can be released within years or decades, right? So we're trying to offset carbon that we dig out of the geologic reservoir, but carbon that may be only temporarily stored, right? And so from a climate perspective, that then if we do this in the long term, this can lead to additional warming and essentially undermine the climate goals that we set off to meet in the first place. And then we also know that there are many problems around carbon accounting, again, which have to do with only temporary storage, but also many other issues such as additionality, making sure that, let's say, the sort of protecting a forest and then using those carbon credits again to offset fossil fuel emissions. Perhaps that forest would have been left standing anyway, right? So that we have to demonstrate where the additional value is, and also the issue of baselines as well as leakage, which means that perhaps those emissions arise in a different place. So I think in the climate space there are many. So there are many, I would say, benefits, right? Sort of if we think about sort of all the co-benefits that we've heard about, but there are also some problematic elements. And perhaps one way to think about this is maybe, especially perhaps we should do a nature-based solution, not so much for carbon sequestration, but for all of the other all other co-benefits, right, which would move them out of the offset space. So this is of course, it's, I would say, a controversial proposition, especially because carbon credits are an important means of financing nature conservation and nature protection. But again, we should not forget these problematic elements, and I think these alternative financing tools that we heard about, those are those are crucial in this context. Let's say to give indigenous communities or communities who want to protect the forest another means of making making revenue from letting the forest stand rather than selling forest carbon credits. Thank you.
Yeah, no, so yeah, those are really good points, Kristen. But I think Zara was talking earlier about the need for good environmental metrics, and carbon is really the only widely accepted metric that we have across nature-based solutions right now. So the question really is whether carbon is a useful proxy for all of the other things that nature-based solutions bring, and sometimes it is. I think that can be the case. There's been a bit of a discussion going on in the chat that I've been half following around the role of forestry and wood products, and whether forest management can be used as a nature-based solution to improve carbon sequestration. I think that's actually a really key area where carbon may not be the metric that gives you the best environmental outcome, because if you cut the forest, we actually don't even understand the carbon dynamics well enough to say which direction the carbon stock is going to go. But certainly if you broaden the metric to include biodiversity, social cultural values, water storage, all of the other really important things, then it's really hard to make a case for forestry, at least industrial forestry is a strong nature-based solution. These are good points around the kind of environmental-ish dark side of nature-based solutions. I wonder if anyone wants to take a stab at some of the social concerns, or some of the ways that nature-based solutions have been used problematically on the social side, and how to move past that. I think just jump in or put up your hand or unmute yourself and start talking. I don't have a way of really picking up on cues any other way, but go ahead, Michael.
Okay. I think it was mentioned in some of Kristen's comments that I think the idea of the solution being the primary solution, not as a afterthought, as a way of trying to deal with additional impacts of industrial-led development that cause negative outcomes. I think that is part of some of the element of dealing with some of the social implications, is really the solution in of itself for the benefit of local communities in the way that they're designed to be able to support what is locally needed. So it's really tying the development of these types of projects to local needs and designing them with a cost effectiveness for outcomes in terms of solutions that are needed for those communities themselves. I think the other element too, and this is something that I brought up at the beginning of the talk, is this idea that with Canada's legislation around UNDRIP, there is the duty to go beyond simple consultation and develop co-management with Indigenous communities. So to break down those colonial structures of using these types of projects without consultation. So whether it's public, private, there is that obligation that is required across the board in all Crown lands for that to be put into force. And I know there's movement in the Canadian provinces to varying degrees as to provinces and territories to varying degrees to how effective this has been. But in terms of using that again as a policy horizon for implementation, not saying that this piece of legislation and the policies that are attached to it is a done deal, but really looking at what is needed up front from a project development standpoint for partnerships, for engagement, for meaningful elements of reconciliation and engagement, is what allows these to move forward in that respect, and it also allows them to be more successful. When we're thinking about project proponents, these types of actions up front create less risks down the road. So there's that incentive as well of developing those types of projects with those things in mind.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Michael. Like you mentioned risk, and that was actually a theme that came up a lot earlier as well. I think it was Stephanie characterized or sort of noted that many people find NBS as a risky for investment. I'm wondering, like, it seems like one of the key challenges of attracting finance for MBS is the returns on that investment are not necessarily financial. And and if they are financial, they don't necessarily go back to the investor in a clear way. Maybe they benefit some other aspect of the economy. Certainly there's health benefits from nature-based solutions. So there's a financial gain to the economy, but it's quite hard to quantify that, and it may have nothing to do with the actual investor. I think maybe the insurance industry is an example where you can build a pretty clear financial case, but there aren't very many of those, and that insurance financial case is really about resilience. Also, it's not about like environmental or social benefits or outcomes of NBS, of nature-based solutions. So yeah, I wonder what people think about that. How do we build a viable financial case for nature-based solutions that will actually, attract, investors or motivate, public funds to be put into this as a environmental and social good. That seems like the real crux of the problem. I wonder if anyone has any solutions or at least thoughts for how to move forward on that question. Yes, Michael, go ahead.
Well, first, I'd like to say if anyone in the audience has the answer to this question as well, you'd save me a lot of hours of research trying to answer exactly this. I think we've touched on a few of these items throughout. I think one of the big issues is the standardization component. Developing those metrics and those measures up front that allow for greater risk at a project by project basis without internalizing all of that risk within one specific financial stream or revenue stream. Really diversifying where that risk is being shared is one of the ways we look to try and move beyond what's possible today into scaling up into additional solutions. I think there's numerous ways that we can look to tackle this, but when we're thinking about the cost benefit versus the cost effectiveness as well, I really wanted to emphasize that when we're thinking about the return on investment versus what are we trying to achieve with the implementation of the solution. If we can look to shift the perspective away from a simple argument around dollars and cents and really look to identify the fact that we're looking to create better communities that do have that resilience aspect to it, and look at causal linkages between the way the biophysical world interacts with economic systems, interacts with investment risk, interacts with human health outcomes, which research is growing in these areas, but there needs to be more piloting, more testing, more data collection in a lot of cases around a lot of these issues in a longitudinal sense. So not just looking at what's possible from a project perspective, but looking at how this project influences outcomes and impacts in a specific area over time. A lot of that is still missing within the context of what it is we're trying to address. And I think looking, bringing it back to standards and metrics and looking to make those a little bit more cohesive across the board, having those in place allows for more risk to be taken for those longer term projects, because that there's going to be a cohort of additional projects that it can feed into, giving that better case for scaling.
Can I jump in? Can I jump in? Yeah. Yes. Okay, great. So I just want to mention that when we were talking about the challenges in implementing nature-based solution, we said that monitoring, evaluation, and knowledge gap is one of them. And if we lack the standard metrics, as Michael mentioned, for assessing nature-based solution outcome, we cannot come up with the cost effectiveness that you brought. Very good point. But there is also a gap between economy and policy, because usually when we talk with municipalities, what they say is that, okay, the upfront cost is more than the long-term distributed benefits. And we don't know whether it's going to be actually implemented and whether it's going to be the long-term benefit for building owners or building practitioners. The other things that we usually, when we have a conversation with municipalities, is mentioned is the fragmented ownership. Who owns the rooftop, the city or the developer or the building practitioner? Who should take care of the maintenance for the green roof and blue roof, for instance, for the long term? So, and as Damon mentioned, the lack of clear return on investment metrics is another things that we need to look at it. But what we are trying to do at NRC is that not just looking at life cycle cost analysis of nature-based solution, but also coming with some kind of an algorithm to put a cost tag for co-benefit of NBS, like health, comfort, well-being. What is the cost tag for that one? What is the air quality improvement cost? What is the reduced flood damage, lower energy bills? Because when we plant trees, especially when we did a study in Vancouver, in the vulnerable communities in Vancouver, and one in Toronto, where the people are socially disadvantaged and their houses are not equipped with AC. When we did a study, although it was a simulation and modeling, there's also a question about whether it's really going to work in the real world or not. But when we did the modeling, we see that in this neighborhood, we could reduce the energy consumption in these buildings because we are providing a better thermal comfort and let's say moderating the ambient temperature. So if people see the lower energy bills in the long term, they come with the ideas to do them themselves. If they see that they plant the trees in their backyard, it's going to increase the property value, they go for it. Why not? They see that the property is going to sell better. And well, there are the things that we can go for it. And there is also another topic about financing nature-based solution is whether it should be public sector funding, private sector investment, or public-private partnership. So whether the government should allocate, let's say, national budget grants or subsidize, or whether it should be only the building practitioners and only the investment from the private, or it should be a combination of, we call it PPPs, public-private partnership. And it shows that in Netherlands, in Singapore, in US, this collaborative agreement between government entities and private companies has been very, very beneficial. And it shows that they can go for it and they actually do it in their cities. I am also co-chairing an international task group on nature-based solutions for buildings and communities. And when we have the discussion around the table, all the European colleagues mentioned that this is not something that only the municipalities should go for it because of the maintenance cost. So the building practitioner and the building owner should be involved from the design step. They should be educated, and awareness is one of the most important things that somehow it is still missing in Canada. The educating the public. When they see these benefits, they definitely go for it. And yeah, that's my 2 cents adds on.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, so many interesting questions in here, and there's a lot of questions in the Q&A as well, which I probably not gonna be able to get to all of them. But I did have a question for Emily. This kind of picks up on this, like, yeah, how do we motivate financing question? But you characterize the investment interest in 2 areas. One around risk, just protecting capital, this is sort of the resilience side of nature-based solution investment, and then the second one around opportunity, which I guess catches the kind of social environmental gains, contributing towards climate mitigation or biodiversity protection. I mean, yeah, do you see a way of like harmonizing those? Are those really 2 separate streams that we need to just kind of think of separately? And I know the insurance industry is very interested in the risk side and not but less interested in the kind of opportunity side. But do you see ways that these can be brought together and synergized?
Yeah. I do think that risk impact dependency analysis, as I was saying earlier, it's an initial entry point, but I do think it's really interesting. And if we succeed in to represent them nature-based solution, but financial tools, to represent them as a long-term assets delivering sustainable environmental and socio-economic benefit, this hopefully this would echo somewhere. I also think that the nature-based solution, putting this way, can help, reduce terrestrial marine protection gap, but also again, whether it's sequestrating carbon but limiting physical and transition risk for portfolios. So the risk part is, I do think it's really important for investors. You mentioned the insurance sector, but investors as well, because especially those who are long-term investors, they're looking at all those risks. And maybe another Yeah, and I mean, having like success metric, being able to prove a net benefit for nature, this can support decision making for investors, impact verification, and I do think one of the findings we did when we did our study echoes what have been mentioned, which is the need of a harmonized methodologies. So I do think that if we get to work on that for the financial sector, it would be beneficiary as well.
Good. Thanks, Emily. I'm going to take a couple of questions in the chat that are, I think, directed mostly towards Stephanie, though maybe others can jump in as well. So this one from Darcy Riddle says, how are standards setters and NSRC looking at the issues of unresolved jurisdiction and land conflicts, Indigenous rights in standard developments? And then there's another question from Dominique Monsieur-Gru. Is there a plan to streamline current available frameworks and standards related to MBS into one Canadian standard for implementation of MBS projects? So I mean, I know those are two quite different questions, but they're both related to standards.
Yeah.
See where we go.
Yeah. So for the second question, probably not, like, because it would be a huge standard. Like even just with the projects that we have going on, like an individual standard could be anywhere from like 50 to 100 pages. There is potential for more like capacity building options that would sort of like amalgamate all of that into like an implementation guide, for example. I do know that Housing, Infrastructure and Communities Canada, they're developing I think they're calling them fact sheets on like, I think they're planning on doing like 15 of them, like sort of outlining like different types of nature-based solutions. But it's not really focused on like guidance and standards. But yeah, to put all of them into one would be very complicated. In terms of the Indigenous jurisdiction, I love this question. It's a very complicated one. But so basically, what we're trying to do is find different ways of engaging early on with Indigenous groups. Community engagement is harder, just, lack of funding and all of that kind of stuff. But what we're trying to do, so like with the watershed-based management standard and the design of coastal nature-based solutions standard, both of those are being done by CSA Group. And we are funding the use of a translational leader to sort of like do a lot of Indigenous engagement and feed that information back to the technical committee at various points in the standards development to address that kind of issue. Most of these standards, they're going to, because nature-based solutions are so place specific, right? So you can't necessarily say in a standard you must use this type of plant, because it's supposed to be pan-Canadian and won't apply to everyone. So a lot of these standards are very much like, the steps to follow. And I think, or at least I'm hoping personally, that they will be able to feed that kind of stuff in to make sure that, Indigenous governance is respected. Maybe there'd be a step for like consulting your local First Nation, for example, on like, plant species or, culturally significant lands and stuff like that. So that's something that, we're definitely working on. And if you have any, suggestions on how we can do better, I welcome those conversations.
Excellent. So I think, David, that is an invitation to you to follow up with Stephanie directly. So we're coming up against time. It's been really interesting questions that have come out of today, and lots of things to think about going forward. Maybe I'll take advantage of two other questions from the chat, just as a way of offering people a chance to give a very less than 1 minute final comment. So question one is, what is the most cost-effective nature-based solution? So pick your favorite. And then the other question is, what are the key barriers at this time? And you could choose just one or two barriers. So maybe I'll just throw that to everyone. We can go around quickly. And what is your like biggest bang for the buck application right now? And what is a key barrier that you think is super important in order to move forward on this? Zara, you unmuted. Do you want to go first? Let's go
Yeah.
around.
Sure. I believe the key barriers is how to scale it up and how to reduce the upfront cost for implementing nature-based solutions and how to come up with the monitoring system, a concise, coherent monitoring system. And the favorite one for me is just planting trees and having your roof green or use a cool roof, the material that has a higher solar reflectivity on your roofs. Go with one of these and try to integrate nature with engineering solution to have a most effective on climate adaptation and reducing the effects of overheating and flooding. Okay, it's more than 1 minute.
Yeah, that was more than one, but it's very concise. So I'll let you. Kirsten, do you want to go next?
Yeah, happy to. So my favorite is protect existing carbon stocks in forest, peatlands, and grasslands.
Thanks. That's close to my heart as well. Do you have a key challenge, or are you good with that?
Yeah, I'm sort of in the interest of time, I'm good with that.
Okay, Michael.
I would say the same thing, conserving intact landscapes, specifically, high biodiversity, high carbon value. Key challenge, measuring, we're stacked against the odds with measuring against opportunity costs. People have to make a living, economies have to grow, and conservation often doesn't measure up. So big challenge to date.
Right. Stephanie?
My favorite will always be wetlands. If I had my way, our whole roadmap for our program stream on nature-based solutions would be wetlands. But I echo, with Michael, just preserving what you already have, I think can go a long way. In terms of barriers, I'll also echo what's already been said, but funding, especially for monitoring and maintenance, especially, seems to be lacking and kind of a barrier for a lot of people to get involved. Thank you.
Emily, last word to you.
Well, everything that has been just right on. I'm going to mention maybe everything related to a specific sector, like regenerative agriculture is something I'd like to learn more on. Other than that, it has been mentioned, like we need, I think, more success metrics or harmonized methodologies to be able to get more involved.
All right, well, thank you everyone for the really engaging discussion. So I know there are a couple of exit polls, so please don't leave quite yet. If you can just stick around. I believe the CSPC has a demographic poll first that they want to launch. So if you could take a minute and fill this out. And then there will be a feedback poll as well. So once everyone has filled out the demographic poll, we will launch the feedback poll, and then we will close at that point. This one's very quick, so maybe everyone can take 10 seconds to fill this one out. And then we can flip to the feedback poll. Yeah, so if someone could close this poll and put up the next one, that'd be great. All right, so I will just close the event formally while this poll is up. Do put in your feedback before you leave if you are willing. And thank you again to CSPC for co-sponsoring this panel with us here at Future Earth and Concordia University. Thank you so much for the panelists for joining us. Very happy to meet those of you I haven't already met, and I hope we will have a chance to continue this discussion in the future. And thank you to the attendees also for joining us on our Tuesday afternoon here, at least in this part of the world.
Thank you for having us and for this opportunity. Don't forget to plant the trees. I'm just saying. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.